again, last night, Raheem Morris is getting killed for his, timeout decisions kind of late in that game. Why do you think, and we see it, week in, week out, why do you think so many coaches in the NFL now are just not good with clock management, whether that's timeout usages or, like Pat said, going for two in situations where they should or they shouldn't? Why does it seem like that number just kind of grows higher and higher every year in terms of coaches who just kind of seemingly don't have the pulse of the game?
Yeah, I don't know it, Ty. It was kind of reminiscent of the Chicago game, where they had to time out and they ran out of time at the end of the game. It's kind of it's mystifying, and I don't know exactly what happened internally between the communication between the head coach, the quarterback, the offensive coordinator. Maybe there's a game management person involved. That's something that none of us really have firsthand knowledge of unless, you're on the staff or involved in the process. What I would say, what I've always tried to do, and I changed a little bit on this with Brady. Okay, what I always try to do was you have 3 timeouts in the 2-minute situation. You use your first timeout between 2 minutes and 1 minute. You use your second timeout between 1 minute and 30 seconds, and then you use your third timeout sometime under 30 seconds. Now, that wasn't an absolute rule, but that was a rule of thumb. And so you really didn't want to have 2 timeouts with 20 seconds to go, and you didn't want to use 2 of your timeouts in the first 30 seconds of a 2-minute situation, where you didn't need to. And so that was kind of the progression. Now, there might be a certain play that would override that, but that was the general rule of thumb. And so you get down to that last 30 seconds, and the decision really is, do you save the timeout for the very end if you only have 1 timeout, not 2, which, that's a whole nother conversation, but you only have 1 timeout. Do you save that for the very end, or do you use it a little bit earlier so you have more time? All right, but now the quarterback's got to manage it. And so Tom and I and Josh had this conversation probably in about, 13, 14, somewhere in there, because I had always wanted to save it for the end, especially if you need a field goal, so you didn't have to run the no-huddle field goal team on, that you could just take a timeout and go in there and kick it. But Brady said, look, I'd rather have more time and less timeouts because it gives me more options than less time and a timeout. So let me handle it. If I screw it up, then that's my fault and you can take it away from me. But I would rather you take the timeout with 27 seconds and give me more time to do something with than run a play with 27 seconds. And now we go to 13 seconds and we have 1 timeout. I'd rather have 27 seconds and no timeouts than 12 seconds and 1 timeout. And it puts a lot of responsibility on the quarterback, but Tom wanted that, and I felt very confident giving it to him. So basically, we fundamentally made that switch. And I would take that third timeout a lot of times in the 30-second range, even though it had gone against a little bit of my previous thinking, because Tom felt more comfortable managing the game that way, and he did it very well. So, I was more than happy to, give him that responsibility because, he could manage it. And so I think some of that depends on just how you want to set it up between the head coach, the quarterback, the offensive coordinator, and again, possibly if you have a game management person, in my case, that would be Ernie, that we all kind of got on the same page, said, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to give it to Brady. And, Tom, here's what you got to work with. You don't have any timeouts. But he wanted more time and less timeouts. And so I think any of these can work, but it certainly helps when you're all on the same page. And that's, that's a big one, really.
You and Tom Brady having that meeting weekly is kind of like legendary. There's shots from Do Your Job 1, Do Your Job 2, Do Your Job 3. I don't know how many of those documentaries we have, but it's the only time we've got to see.
There's only one, but go ahead.
Okay, yeah, all right. Anyways, there needs to be Do Your Job 2. But
the other documentary, as you remember, is The Roast. I wouldn't count that one.
We did not participate in that. If you look at the names that were in there, we were not one of them.
I know.
Yep. Dog, gotcha. But whenever you and Tom would meet, is that the type of things that you would talk about, situation stuff? You would talk about the defense. You would talk like those meetings. I think are pretty legendary now. Everybody in their head sees it. Tom's sitting at your desk. The shot's here. It's clearly your office, and it's like that is a gathering of the brain trust of the Patriots each week. When did that start, and what were those meetings about? Was it about this type of shit, or was it about everything?
Right. So when when Coach Rabine passed away in 2001, at the beginning of 2001, he was the quarterback coach. Charlie was the offensive coordinator. Charlie West, the offensive coordinator. And so we kind of had to replace Coach Rabine. And so I did that on the defensive side of the ball. So that's when Tom and I would talk on Tuesdays about this is what the defense is doing. This is how they're playing it. This is how they're playing their cover 3. This is how they're playing their cover 4. When they go to blitz 0, they make these adjustments, so forth. So I instructed Tom on the defense. Charlie talked to him about the offense, right? We're going to run this play on this play. If we get this, we're going to do that, and so forth. And as that evolved, and as Tom really understood the defenses better, then our conversations about defense became shorter, and we talked more about just overall how to attack the defense and, personnel matchups, how to handle good rushers and so forth. It just became a more in-depth conversation. But the Saturday morning meeting was always more about situations. The Tuesday meeting, the one that I think was shown on that documentary you're referring to, was talking about Ed Reed and the Baltimore defense and so forth. The Saturday meeting was about situations. How to handle different time situations or personnel or substitutions or rules or whatever it was. The sliding thing as an example, the quarterback slides and they spot the ball back where the ball is. And we've seen multiple examples where the quarterback slides early and doesn't get the first down because of where he slides. He should have gone further, like when, Pittsburgh was trying to, run out the clock against, I think it was Washington. And Fields slid too early. Things like that. But the situations we would cover were a lot of times what had happened the week before or the previous couple of weeks. So, to me, Atlanta, they should have watched the Chicago game, even though they weren't involved in the Chicago game. They should have watched that. Every team in the league should have watched that. And they should have said, okay, if we were in this situation, what would we do? What would we do? And at what point would the head coach say, hey, we got to take a timeout, or the quarterback, or whatever it is? And when you see things like that come up, that's a great example. The Cincinnati-Denver game is another one that I think if I was the head coach in the NFL, I don't care what team I was on, I would watch that with my staff and then go over it with the team and say, okay, here's what we do here. Here's what we would do. Here's the type of play we would run. Here's when we would do, and play both sides of it, because you could be on offense or you could be on defense, but you're playing both sides of the play. And one of the really most interesting games was the the overtime game between Atlanta and who was that against?
Washington?
Earlier in the year. Was it
Atlanta and the Bucks? Kirk Cousins set the record.
And the Bucks. Right, Atlanta and the Bucks. Yeah, that was the weekend that I was in Washington, and Jed Fish showed that to his team. And he was going back and forth about, here's the Bucks, and then here's Atlanta, and here's the Bucks. And it was about a half-hour meeting with his team, and Jed was explaining in great detail. It was a tremendous meeting, honestly, one of the best meetings I've seen, about how the team we would do this in this situation, and look at how this player made this decision here, and we wouldn't want to make that decision, or we would want to make that decision, or this was played right. And the game went back and forth and back and forth. And then, the guy who ends up catching the pass is the special teams guy who never even plays on offense, about, Hodge being ready to go, going in there and taking advantage of his opportunity and winning the game. And then all of his teammates saying, hey, there's nobody we're happier for than this guy, because he's the first one on, last one off, works harder, and we needed him, and he came through. And those are the kind of things that you just learn situationally. And I would say one of the best feelings that I've ever had as a coach would be when we were good in New England, and I would walk into that Saturday night meeting, and the guys would all be sitting around having dinner, and the games would be on, and it'd be Georgia, Alabama, or Michigan, Ohio State, or whatever the game was, and everybody'd be watching it. And they would all be talking about, hey, watch out for the bingo situation. They're going to hard count here. Be ready for this. Oh, they made a bad play here. We wouldn't have done that. And they were talking situational football, or giving each other a hard time about what their alma mater had done right or done wrong in the situation. But it was all situational football, and they're just watching the game, and everybody's into it. And so that's when I knew, with the Brewskis and Rodney Harrisons and Brady's and all those guys, Troy Brown, that those guys were so into it, because they just couldn't watch a game. they had to watch a game and talk about strategy and play calling and timeouts and, that wasn't a foul and it was a foul and those kind of things because they were just so into the game. But honestly, it was an awesome feeling as a coach to hear our players have those kind of conversations.
Yeah,
and that's why they were good.
Yeah, when you talk about a culture, it's like there it is right there. That is literally what a culture is being talked about. Do you think you're going to be able to?
And inevitably, there would be a situation that would come up from time to time where there would be like, hey, what would we do in that situation? And you're sitting there as a coach saying, that we don't quite have that. Like what we would do if it was this, but this is a little bit different. We need to talk about that. And honestly, it was a great, it was a great environment. I mean, it was fantastic.